Sorry. Hello, everybody. So my name is Sorcha O'Higgins, and thank you to Donald and Grania for Grow Remote for asking me to come on. I'm just going to be giving you a really quick overview of sort of how I got to where I am as a freelancer. I'm not too sure if any of you guys freelance, but it's what I do. And I just thought it would be good to, sort of dive into that a little bit. So I hope this is, if not useful, interesting at least. So as I said, my name is Sorcha O'Higgins. I am a freelance writer, copywriter, and content creator, among other things. So I'll just run you really quickly through my career trajectory and how I sort of got interested in the things I do. So my background is in architecture. I studied architecture in UCD before I moved to London it was during the recession, so it was 2009. And I worked as an architect there, and I got my part 3 professional architectural qualifications are sort of a 3-stage thing. So I was working in London, working as an architect. I'd kind of reached the end of the line in terms of there was no more study to do. I'd been studying architecture and architecture related stuff for about 8 years at that stage, between the undergrad and the professional stuff. And I just was really, really miserable. I really didn't like my job. I really didn't like London. So I left and I moved to Mexico. And it wasn't until I was in Mexico for a few months that I realized that it wasn't really that I hated my job, and it wasn't really that I hated London. It was that I hated that 9-to-5 lifestyle. I really struggled to be told what time to show up at a job, what time to take my lunch, what time to leave. I really didn't like this kind of the way my time was broken up into blocks that I had no control over. And so that was a real kind of light bulb moment for me. I knew that I was very unhappy in London, but I didn't quite realize why until I left and got a bit of distance from it. So when I was in Mexico, I started teaching English. I started learning Spanish at the same time. Those two things were really, there was a symbiotic kind of relationship between those, that it was because I was sort of learning to teach English and I was also learning to speak Spanish. They kind of worked in tandem. And because I didn't have a job there, I really had to kind of figure things out for myself in a very undefined way, which was sort of the first time I'd ever done that. Then after about 6 months in Mexico, I really didn't see myself living there full time. So I moved to Argentina. And when I was in Argentina, really this whole world of remote working, it was very nascent at the time anyway. This was around 2013, 2014, 2015. Maybe around 2015, 2016, it started to become kind of a thing that people were doing. But I met a lot of people there who were working remotely in various different guises, whether they were in tech, whether they ran their own businesses, whether they were freelance designers. And so that really kind of opened my eyes to this different way of living, where you could be anywhere in the world. You could be just working from your computer as long as you could do that. And also another thing with the financial aspect of, if you were working remotely but living in Argentina, but you were earning in dollars, you lived like a king. So there were just all of these opportunities that it seemed to provide that I had no clue about before. And that was just hugely exciting to me. By this stage, I hadn't worked in architecture, I hadn't worked as an architect or anything to do with architecture since I had left London. But what I was doing a lot of was writing. When I was in Mexico, I really just went back and did a quick scan of my life, I suppose, and just sort of tried to figure out what it was that I actually enjoyed doing and what I liked to do. And writing was one of those things. So I decided to start writing, to see if anybody would hire me or if there was anything I could do. So I got a job with a local English speaking news organization. And again, this was really around the time that kind of clickbait and listicles and things like that were really popular. It was sort of deep in the kind of BuzzFeed era of things. So they were always looking for people to write little cultural snippets or whatever about Argentina, about being an outsider in Argentina or whatever. So that was sort of a really easy in to the world of writing. That sort of I had the freedom to write about whatever I want because they really didn't care. I was going and I was interviewing people. I was writing about subjects that interested me. They, were really like long form, some of them, just because they weren't reeling me in and I was rambling. But again, it was just really interesting to see the possibilities of writing as a career. So I sort of started to get more writing gigs, whether they were translating. My Spanish was kind of good enough at this stage to be able to, with the help of Google Translate, be translating websites from Spanish into English. I joined some writing groups and I started doing a master's. This was towards the end of my time in Argentina. I was there for 5 years. And the master's was, it was called The History and Culture of Architecture and the City. So I sort of started to writing about architecture. And that was a way that I was circling back to being engaged with the discipline again, but not actually through being an architect. So I moved back to Ireland in 2018. And I was still freelancing, still working remotely, but kind of picking up more gigs that were maybe not necessarily fully remote, but because I'd have to go for meetings. But just the way that I work with freelancing by its very nature is more remote than not anyway, because I'm just working from my computer. If I need to meet people, this is obviously pre-pandemic as well. If I had to meet people, I would just run into their office. Obviously now all of that can be done online. So yeah, that is a very brief overview of what I have done. So what do I do in my capacity as a freelance writer, copywriter, and content creator? So one of the primary things I do is to write content. And so that is for people's blogs. I write for database. I have a relationship with the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, where I act as a rapporteur for them on big conferences. Sorry? Oh. So I act as a rapporteur for the RAI. I also write articles. So yeah, I write architectural journal or articles on architecture for architectural journals. I write in the sphere of sort of writing about architecture. I write some policy reports for the government. I then also do a lot of kind of work with creative agencies where I work on branding, where I do copywriting, where I do discovery projects of kind of new industries. And there's a lot of this, especially the copywriting work and the discovery work that I do with branding agencies and creative agencies, and the policy writing work that I do for the RAI and the government. I find these absolutely fascinating because I feel like somehow I've gotten in the back door, that I'm kind of at the table at these really important meetings and really important policy creation sessions. And I'm like, how did I make it here? This is like, I feel like such an imposter, but because those are worlds that like I would never seek out myself, or I would never be working for the government. I'd never be working for a large corporation. It's just really interesting for me to be in the room. So who do I work for? I work for architects. I work for architectural semi-state bodies. I work for government departments. I work for small businesses. I work for creative agencies. I work for startups. I work for hospitality companies, tourism agencies. I suppose I've done a lot of travel writing in the past as well. So that's always something that is useful in terms of getting new clients. I actually just got a new client here in Westport who I'll be doing kind of writing travel content for. And so where do I do it? So obviously I started doing it. I started freelancing / working remotely in Argentina in about 2014, 15, 16, those years. I moved back to Ireland in 2018. So then I was working from Dublin, and in June of last year, I moved to Westport in Mayo. So that is where I'm based now. So once, as you guys know, you have a decent internet connection and a decent setup, you can work from anywhere. So that is, I have moved around a lot, and it is my intention to keep doing so. Ideally, I would like to spend 3 months of the year out of the country in March, September, and December. So that's my next plan, to kind of figure out how I can have the base in Westport, but also be away for those 3 specific months of the year. So, again, freelancing. I'm not sure if you guys are fully employed, if you're self-employed, if you've ever freelanced. I suppose freelancing, the kind of things that define it is that you usually work alone. You usually are employed by a client on a project basis. So you kind of come in, you do what you have to do for the duration of the project, and then you leave. And freelancers more often than not would sell services as opposed to products. So as I said, I write, that's the service that I sell. So the boring stuff about freelancing, you really have to be very organized. I'm not very organized, so that's a real struggle for me, but I do try. You have to be really self-motivated. You have to be kind of confident in what you do because you're going after your own work. You have to be pretty disciplined. You have to be a self-starter. There are lots of qualities that freelancing requires. And I think the biggest thing about freelancing is that you have to be okay with a lack of security and stability. I am unemployable at this point. Maybe I could get a job. I'm sure that I could, but I would last 5 minutes. Because I just can't have somebody else's structure imposed on me. But the flip side of that then is that there's no fixed paycheck, at the end of the month. Your annual leave isn't paid, your sick days aren't paid. So yeah, it's definitely not for everybody, because it is, as you can see in this image here, it is a juggling act. So because it's a juggling act, you really have to get good at prioritizing. There are 2 things you have to get good at. You have to get good at prioritizing, and you have to get good at being able to switch between things really quickly. And then there are just other things like time management, rates, finances, the stuff that unfortunately as a freelancer, we all have to take care of, do our own taxes, all that sort of stuff. The fun stuff, I would say, is I was thinking about this before I came on, and what I, at the moment, having freelanced for a long time, is I am really enjoying the fact that I've gotten myself to a position where I'm able to say no to jobs I don't want. That is always where I want to be. I want to have enough work that, and enough variety of work that keeps things interesting, and that I have, enough of a stable income. But I don't want to be taking on work that I either don't have the time for or that I don't want to do. And I actually turned down a job yesterday, so that made me really happy. And I suppose another thing that just a kind of a rule of thumb that I abide by is that when you're working with clients as a freelancer, it's always just really the strategy of under promising and over delivering. Just really is a good one to adopt, because if you think something's going to take you, if you know something's going to take you 3 or 4 days, you say it's going to take you 4 days, but you deliver it in 3. So, that's how you add value, and that's how you kind of maintain your reputation, your professionalism, your reliability. All of those things are absolutely key as a freelancer, because the only reputation you have to fall back on is your own. You don't have the name of a company, you don't have a boss. So yeah, I think I was saying to Donal and Grania before I came on here that I only recently joined Grow Remote after I had gone to a meetup in Westport with the Mayo chapter of Grow Remote. And I was kind of saying to myself, God, I've been working remotely for years. I don't need to go to a remote working session. And I'm so glad I went, because it was just, especially after the past 2 years, feeling quite disconnected from people, it was just amazing to get back into a room with people who are really passionate about remote working, as I am. I can't remember remember what that slide was. So why do I freelance, and what is the thing that all of us, those people that I was in the room with in Mayo had in common? Freedom is the biggest reason that I freelance. The freedom to do whatever I want with whoever I want, when I want, and from wherever I want. But what about you guys? I suppose selfishly, one of the reasons for me wanting to do this skills and tools session today as well was to really engage with you guys. I know a few of you have very kindly responded to questions that I've put up in the chat in Slack. But via Grow Remote, I recently got a gig writing content for a startup called Clearword. And their focus is very much on remote and hybrid working and the choices we make around that. And every blog post that I write we're taking some sort of friction point or pain point and we're exploring that. So I would really like to hear from you guys what your kind of friction points or pain points are around working remotely, going back to the office. If maybe you're thinking about getting into freelancing, but there's something you're unsure about. I would love to hear from you guys to see what your friction points are, because then I can write about them, and we can have this kind of really nice sort of feedback loop that can, all sit in one place, and yeah, we can kind of build up a library of information, a bit like this session, which lives on YouTube. So that would be amazing if you could share some of those with me. Thank you. I skipped a slide or two there because I know we're running out of time as well. But that's my website, my email, and my Instagram. I am also an artist. I haven't gotten into that here, but if you go onto my Instagram, you will see that. So just not to get confused, because sometimes it's a bit confusing because I do an awful lot of stuff. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Brilliant.